Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast. I'm your host, Greg Myers, and today's special guest is Kevin Sisk, the president of Bill360. So, Kevin, thank you for being here, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Great. Yeah, just for the audience, Kevin and I actually worked together. Can't believe it was like nearly 20 years ago at Chase Payment Tech. So definitely look forward to catching up with you today.
Yeah, no, I know it's hard to, when you say it out loud, it's just like, really? Can't be that long, but I know it's been a while, but it's great to see you, great to be here, great to visit.
Well, before we dive into your career in the company, can you give us a quick snapshot of your personal background, maybe where you grew up, where you call home today, a few things like that?
Yeah, sure. So I actually grew up in El Paso, Texas, and if anybody's ever been there, it's about 700 miles west of Dallas. So it gives you an idea how big Texas is. But so that was my hometown. Right now, I currently live in Dallas, Texas. My wife, my kids, we raised our kids. But I spent an enormous amount of time in Tampa, Florida, and or Jacksonville, Florida. Tampa, Florida is our current headquarters for Bill360, and Jacksonville is our direct sales office. But I've been in Dallas, though, since 1994. We separated from the military. I was in the military before that. Both my wife and I were in the Marine Corps, separated from the military, and then short time in Atlanta, and then we moved to Dallas. And my brothers were there, and then eventually my mom, who was in El Paso, she moved, and so that's what we call home. Even though I spend just about every week in Florida right now.
So your second home is in Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, can you walk us through your professional journey and how you got to Bill360?
Sure. So I've been in payments, and I tell everybody I've been in payments really my entire private, or civilian career. So I was in the military and then got out, landed in payments in 1995, which was then First USA, that became Payment Tech and ultimately part of JP Morgan Chase. And so my very first job there was as a tech support rep. And at the time, I didn't know anything about payments. I really didn't know anything about the civilian community. I was just trying to get a job. And I remember one of the things that the HR person that was interviewing me asked me what my ideal, and you know how they ask those questions, where you want to be in 5 years, what's your ideal, this and that. And so, and I hadn't really practiced anything, but she asked me that question of, hey, what's your ideal work environment? I was just coming out of the Marine Corps, and I said, hey, if it's climate controlled and I can eat when I want to, that's my ideal work environment. And she looked at me like, do I write that down? Is he serious? Or should I ask security to come take? It was one of those moments, but I was dead serious. I was like, man, if I, when I'm hungry, I can eat. And it's inside, I don't care what I have to do. But anyway, so that began my journey in payments. And then I had a host of different roles and responsibilities along the way, primarily on the operational service side of the house for the first, 6-7 years. And then I was handed our agent bank business and then ultimately our ISO, our independent sales organization business, and pretty much stayed within that realm for a handful of years. Left Chase, went to First Data, Fiserv, essentially doing the same role there. And then a couple of years as the chief operating officer for Bank of America Merchant Services, unwound that JV, which was a JV between Bank of America and Fiserv. And then another, tour through Fiserv as the GM for the JV of Wells Fargo and Fiserv. So I had the JV of Payment Tech that was Chase and First Data, and then with Bank of America and First Data, and then with so I had my run through the JVs. But in that run during the Chase days, the Payment Tech days, is when I met Paul Hunter, who's our CEO and founder of Bill360. And Paul was a customer of ours at the time. His ISO, Sterling Payments, bought front-end authorizations off of the Chase or the Payment Tech network, which was here in Tampa. And so that's how I became acquaintances with Paul, and then we got to know each other pretty well over the years. And the one thing about Paul, it always stood out, and this wasn't me just saying it, it was all of us on the Chase side who were exposed to the whole entire ISO community, is that he was very much not your typical ISO-like person. And he had many other different businesses and all that, and he kind of got into the payments in a roundabout way, but he ran an impeccable organization that ultimately sold to Evo, and then that resold again to Global Payments. So his business is now part of Global Payments. But he and I have known each other then, so it's 20 plus, like 20 something years. And when he started Bill360, which was about January 2021, he had some board members, one of which was Dan Sharon, one of my former bosses, and many of you may know the name. And then Dan gave me a call, so I guess it was late 2022, and told me what Paul was up to and said we should connect. And so Paul and I started talking, and the next thing you know, because at the time I didn't know, I don't want to say the word retire, but I was thinking about, hey, do I do something different, just completely outside of payments, just not necessarily thinking about money. It's like, hey, if you're going to do something and you're not thinking about money, you're thinking about what do I want to do? And I actually contemplated for a brief period of time I always loved trains. It's like, what would I like to be a train engineer for these freight trains, across the country? I thought, man, that'd be like, as a kid, I always thought that would be such a fun thing. But then I started talking to Paul and then was visiting him here in Tampa, meeting the team and all that. And then within a couple months, I was on board and I haven't looked back. And so it's my first run through a startup. Like I said, it's the military, and then it's all been big corporate. And it's been everything that people think it is times 10. So there's nothing easy about it, but it's very, very rewarding. And what I told Paul right before we sort of, formalized our agreement, he said, hey, this could be, a great way to really end your career, and help them build a company and a platform and, leave a mark in the industry. And I thought about that for a while. And then I said, Paul, I don't really think of it as a great way to end my career. I said, now that I've got to know the business better and what they're doing, because I spent, a month and a half, before full time. And I said, I feel like it's everything that I've done, even the military, big corporate, all that was just preparation for this. So it's almost as if I feel like now I'm getting a jersey and getting on the field, because when you're inside the big corporations, right? I mean, you can have people have successful careers there and everything else, but you're still part of that big machine and your impact, it's hard to tell like how big is that. But in a startup, it quickly, and it can be really good and it can also be really bad, right? You find out quickly. The marketplace is not sensitive in that way. And so I really feel like everything up until I joined Bill360 was really just preparation for this. So it's not something, basically it wasn't something, hey, I end my career. It's like, this is like the test of everything you've been doing is, can you really do this thing? And so anyway, that's how I got to Bill360. And that was in April of 2023 is when we formalized it. I had been going back and forth from January 2023, but we formalized our agreement in April of 2023 and haven't looked back.
Well, we've both said the name of the company several times, so tell our audience what Bill360 actually does.
Yeah, right. So I guess that's a good point. So Bill360 we're a payment facilitator, but we're a accounts receivable automation. And I know that's a mouthful to say, but our software provides full service accounts receivable automation for primarily the small and medium sized businesses. And if you think of account receivable automation, there's some providers out there who will have software that do elements of it, but our fundamental belief is to really have that comprehensive automation, you have to be able to facilitate the payment. And that was our genesis, right? And so to become a payment facilitator so that when we install the software to our customers, that we also can make the payment happen. We don't have to introduce a third party, which is just more friction or more points of failure. And so we're the one throat to choke for all the customers on our platform. But most people are familiar with AP. There's tons and tons and hundreds of AP systems out there, and probably a lot of individuals. You sign up, for bill pay service so you can pay your water bill and whatnot. Well, if you think of accounts receivable automation as kind of the reverse of that. So if you're a small business owner and you have customers that want to pay you through an AP system that they've signed up with, well, you as a small business, there's some element of work you have to do to be basically signed up on that platform. But if you have hundreds of customers and they're using dozens and dozens of AP systems, then that's multiple things that you have to sign up for as the business to get paid that way. AR automation reverses that. So it puts the business owner in the driver's seat to help their buyers. It gives them a way to more easily pay them. But this way, they're not having to sign up and manage all these multiple AP systems. And we're focused on B2B. So any business out there that sells to another business and uses an invoice as the primary means of getting paid, that's our target. So we automate that whole process. And it's been a process fundamentally that from an automation standpoint, hasn't really been touched because it is hard. It's very difficult to automate that. And so therefore, it just hasn't been. And so that's where we felt that was a gap in the marketplace, even though it's hard to fill and solve. But it's one that's now it's very worthwhile. And we bring real change and real uplift to these small business owners where, the Coca-Colas of the world or the IBMs or the Exxons, right? They're always going to find ways to automate their processes. They have the resources and whatnot, but the small, medium-sized folks, they're just not, so it's until a technology arrives at a point in time where it's cost effective, one, for somebody to build it, and two, for them to consume it. And so we're at that place now, but that's our primary solution is accounts receivable automation with payment facilitation. So,
well, what would you say is the biggest challenge your company is solving for your customers right now?
All these businesses, they have their processes, and like any small business, primarily they're focused on growing, right? How do you get new sales and things like that? And oftentimes the back office or the receivable, even payables, just gets neglected. And so it's somebody who's been sitting back there for years and they just figure out how to do it manually, and they've got their process and people don't question it. And so for us, and I always use the iPhone, even though it's not quite that same, parallel, but it's similar. Like you and I didn't know we needed iPhones in 2007, but in 2008, when iPhones came onto the marketplace, we said, hey, we need an iPhone. Accounts receivable automation is similar to that. And so when we're talking to a lot of these small, medium-sized businesses, they have these rooted processes that are very manual. And so there's an element of process change. So it's one thing, people can see it quickly and go, wow, this is amazing. It's easy. It makes my life easier. But then it's like, oh, now I have these 3 people that were doing these functions that I don't really need them to do that much anymore. So all of a sudden you're encroaching on this sort of embedded process to these businesses with modern technology. And so sometimes that's an effort to help people see, like, changing that process means, hey, either you're going to have to repurpose some of these people, or in some cases, they don't need them anymore. And that is not always an easy thing to do. But it is a real dynamic in helping people. It's not just adopting the technology, it's adopting a process change. And that tends to be for anybody, right? You're changing the process, and it's bigger than what you just installing new software. So,
well, what would you say differentiates Bill360 from your competitors?
Right off the top, we are intensely focused in the B2B space. So there are some, and I say air quote competitors, is that they have some elements of what we do, but they're really B2C centric, and they put a little bit of a B2B wrapper around it. But in the end, it's really a B2C offering. And that just doesn't fit small businesses. I mean, it may move them a little bit, but not in the way Bill360 does. And so our genesis was with the small business in mind that sells to other small business, to other business. I mean, they could be big businesses too, but businesses that are selling to business. So we're intensely focused in the B2B space, which includes a service element of that with real human beings, because we also fundamentally believe that these business owners deserve to have live customers and not trying to work through a chat or email. And, because some of the competitors, you really can't find, and they don't try to hide that. Their business model isn't through a phone number. Their business model is through the chat bots or email. And we fundamentally believe that, business owners deserve to have that human touch. And so that's a cornerstone, but it's not, our platform's built in such a way that it's a very light touch, right? They don't need a lot of support. Once they're up and running, they don't need a lot of support, but from time to time things come up or they're confused about something, or we roll out new features and stuff like that. And we like to call them and talk through, help them understand how they can use it. All that is, we get tons of feedback on that they really, really love that. They've got comparative data in previous experiences where they just could never talk to somebody. And I think, everybody experiences that to some level, and just in our personal lives, calling trying to get an 800, trying to get somebody, and you got to get, navigate the mazes and everything else. And it's just difficult. And certainly as a small business owner, when you have some issues, especially as it relates to your money, it's nice to be able to talk to somebody and somebody that knows what they're doing.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the future. Where do you see the biggest growth opportunities in your segment of payments?
So we're really the software, vertical specific software. So if you think there's pick a software, right? Or pick an industry, and there's dozens of software companies that are serving the needs of that industry. In other words, help that industry be more efficient in how those businesses operate. And so that's a core part of our growth strategy, is partnerships with those types of software companies and helping their end use. So in effect, what we do is we amplify that software, because most of them aren't going to do payments, and they're certainly not going to bring accounts receivable automation. That's just, if I'm an industry specific software provider, I'm focused on all the attributes of that industry and making it easy in that industry. I'm not going to go solve this receivable that's very complicated in back offices that are very different from business to business, even in the same industry. So they sort of stop there, or they'll create the invoice. Well, we pick up there. And so we make that software really more complete for their customers, because then we bring helping them get paid. And not only helping them get paid, getting them paid faster, and how those customers actually manage the interactions with their customers, suppliers, buyers. So we make that whole process much better, so that customers, the friction sometimes that comes when people are collecting money, right, on an aged invoice, that we help them automate all that and do things too where it doesn't become aged, right? If there's questions and things like that a buyer might have on an invoice, that they can communicate easily with that supplier, and it's not an email. We got an integrated tool, so that way they're communicating together. And if people change, right, if an employee at the supplier or an employee at the buyer, if they change roles, somebody new, it's all that history is within the tool. It's not within people's email boxes. So if I'm communicating with you and then I leave, and then you're going, hey, where's Kevin? Well, he left. And then it's in Kevin's email. Well, he's gone. So now we got to go figure out his email. So we have it all in the tool. So if people change, it doesn't matter. The tool's still there. It has all the residual history and communications and invoice between the buyer and the seller. So it takes the friction out of what sometimes could, on the collection side, we remove that, make it easy, let the tool manage that, and then let those business owners, hopefully they spend more time on, business development or relationship management.
Are those vertical software companies that you mentioned, are they a sales channel, or do you partner with them and get embedded in their software? Or is it more like a channel?
Yeah, it's. I mean, we can do it either way. We do full integrations. It can be referral type relationships. It can be partial integrations. It really depends on the software partner and their objectives, and with their own customer base. We can do them all. So if they want to fully integrate to us, we're all over that. If it's partial or if it's just referral, but we have comprehensive go-to-market strategies for each one of those channels to ensure success, no matter how they choose to connect with us.
Well, what does success look like for Bill360, say, over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. Well, in the next 3 to 5 years, that we got hundreds of thousands of buyers and suppliers on our platform or within our network that we're servicing every single day. And what's unique, and I didn't really touch on this, is that in traditional payments, and I know there's a lot of people, in traditional payment that might be listening, is that when you normally, and I'll use Chase as an example. Chase signs up a customer to accept payments. It's kind of one dimensional, right? They accept payments and that's it. But Chase doesn't necessarily know who that customer they just signed up, who all their customers are, right? As the transactions come, they see the transaction, all that. Where with Bill360, when the direct customer signs up with us, which we call supplier, when a supplier signs up, on average, if they're sending out, let's say 200 unique invoices a month to unique customers or their buyers, what we refer to as, is now we have visibility. They sign up with us, sync to our platform. We have visibility of their customers. So that's really, we have the one supplier who's now in the network plus their 200 customers. So we signed one, our network just grew by 201. And we have complete visibility of that history between that buyer and supplier, their past invoices, how often they buy, what their average, purchase invoice, how much they spend. So we have all this history that in a normal relationship you don't have. And there's a lot of things that we're going to be doing within that network to bring value to those buyers and suppliers. And so, you ask 3 to 5 years, is that we have high aspirations around what we do within that network that's going to be really beneficial to all the parties involved, but in ways that you can't do in just traditional merchant acquiring. So we're really excited about that. Yeah.
That network effect is something kind of unique, right, to your business.
Yeah, very.
Okay. Well, what are some of the biggest trends that you see reshaping the whole payments industry?
Dare I say AI?
Comes up in every conversation.
Right. It comes up in every conversation. And everybody says it. And it means a lot of things to a lot of people. But, like many fintechs and certainly startups, that we have an intense amount of focus around that. And so if you think about it in two ways, we think about it internally, right? And we do use it, intensely internally to develop faster our own service models and, all the things that people are trying to do to leverage AI for productivity output. But then it's the things, what are you doing to actually help your customers make their lives easier? So the personalization of AI. And so we have an enormous amount of focus around that, which includes back to that network, but helping our customers make decisions about their business in ways that maybe they could get there if they were thinking about it and they had somebody to do the right amount of analysis, but we're going to help them in ways that they probably haven't even thought about yet. That they'll not only be able to make better decisions, but we'll have options for them to let the AI implement that option if they choose it. And so I think the personalization of AI, of course, fraud prevention and all those things, I think those are all going to be big drivers as we move forward in payments. But the personalization of it, I think, is going to be a big driver in the next 12. It certainly is for us, and how you bring that to bear to really help your customers' lives get better, make them smarter about their business and just easier to run it. I think, people also talk about real time and instant payment. I think those are also going to be, those are going to get, more and more traction, and especially, if it's cross-border type things. That's definitely going to get legs, and along with digital assets. So you kind of think of those all in one group. I mean, they're different, but it's outside the card networks, basically. The digital, and then certainly with the regulatory environment, that's going to start adding more clarity. And with more clarity, right, then you're going to have more entrance into the market and helping people to, use those assets in a way, as us as consumers, that's easy for us to use. I think that's going to take on a new momentum. And embedded finance and embedded lending, I think those are things we're focused on too, and we have an offering. And so I think people are familiar with the kind of the buy now, pay later model, but it's also, we think there's going to be a movement to sort of a kind of a traditional lending within these embedded apps, right? Because with AI, you can do so much more analysis and underwriting and risk management quicker. So it only makes sense, right, that traditional lending could also take place in that same sort of buy now, pay later, embedded model. Whereas before, right, it was more limited and it made sense, and you kind of had these payment periods. Whereas now, with the information you can have access to, it's just as easy to do kind of a traditional loan. So anyway, those are some of the things we see. It's certainly the next 12 months. There's other things, but that's a handful.
Well, a couple of final questions. So if you could go back and give yourself some advice, maybe at the start of your career, what would that be?
Yeah, it's funny. I just had this conversation with a young man, close friend of my son's. They went to high school together, and he's kind of in that transition period in his life, trying to figure out what he's going to do next. And I pointed him towards payments. And that's one of the things I wished, had I been intentional about it. Because oftentimes in the pay, and I like to ask people, and you're probably most people swerve into payments, right? They don't get up and go into payments.
Right.
Like, hey, I want to go be a lawyer. I want to be a chiropractor. I want to be an engineer. Those are intentional decisions. It's rare that people are going, hey, I want to go into payments. But I encouraged him, and I gave him some things to read and some things to think about, and that it's the one industry, right? Everybody it's needed. We know we agree to that, and sort of the recurring nature of it. But it really is sort of the glue of the free enterprise system, right? Making it increasingly easier for people to move money between businesses and individuals is always going to be a necessity. And so I encourage this young man to take a hard look at the payments industry and starting out really on the selling side. And, if I had it all to do over, knowing what I know now, that's probably what I'd have done day one, and with some being intentional about it. But I think it's a great industry, and especially for young folks that are, maybe they just finished college or they didn't go to college and they're just thinking about or they're fresh out of the military, young, and trying to think of what the next thing to do. I think it's a great industry that's always going to be there. And it's also, you're running the tangent with technology too. So even though it's that core thing, like the need to move money is always going to be there, running the free enterprise system, but also that technology that's helping that, you're always going to be part of that edge of technology too. So it's not like, well, I want to go into the tech space, so therefore I can't do payments. It's like it's the place you can go into, and then you'll be part of that technology wave. You'll always be on the edge of that. So maybe the way to sum it up is that there's an old Chinese proverb that says, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is 20 years ago. And then it's when's the next best time to plant a tree? Today. And so I think in payments, it's one of those things, the sooner you get started, you won't regret it.
Yeah, and I fell into payments. I certainly, was in other places before and just kind of fell in, and here I am, 20 years later, still doing it.
Yeah, here we are talking about it, and the same thing for me. And it's funny because people that have been in it for a while, I always like to ask them that, because there's always a story there, and it's never, hey, I decided I want to be a payments person. There's always a story of how they got there, and it's usually a friend or either some fluky thing that got them there, and but then they stay. That's the other thing too, is then they stay.
Okay. Well, one final question. What's one thing that people listening to the show today should be thinking about right now when it comes to payments?
I think security, that's the thing. And we haven't really touched on that. We talk about AI and all the positive things that it can and does do and has done. I know everybody's used it at some level, even in their personal, but it can also be weaponized, right, in the payment system. And so the fraudsters also have access to AI and very committed to it. And so I would just say security in the payments, that's just being hyper vigilant all the time you just can't afford not to be there because of AI and the speed with which the fraudsters evolve. It's hard to stay up with them, but we have to. And so that should be on the top of everybody's mind. I know we didn't talk about it much, but it's always for us. I mean, it's a nonstop thought. Security, because that second you're not paying attention or you let your guard down is not a good thing. So, but yeah, security, and in your personal lives too. I mean, changing all those things. I mean, they're getting better. Their phishing attacks get better. All the deep fakes that they can, even invoices and things like that. So I would just say security.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up the show. So Kevin, thank you so much for being on today. I know your time is very valuable, so I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, well, thank you, Greg. It's great seeing you, and thanks for having me on. It's great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.